Well, good morning, everyone. We're at 10 o'clock, so the hearing is now open. I've got an echo from this, but I hope everyone can hear me properly. Good. Okay. Do let me know if my voice drops and you can't. I'll introduce myself, or reintroduce myself to some of you briefly. Paul Griffiths. I'm an architect, a member of the Institute of Historic Building Conservation. I'm one of the inspectors who's dealing with the examination of the York local plan. Unfortunately, my colleague Simon Barclay has been called away with other commitments. He's sort of moved on a little bit from mere inspector to something else, and you know, there are other calls on his time.
He's now superintendent, is he?
So I'm doing it on my own, which yeah, may be a good thing in some ways, but there we are. That's just to explain why I'm here on my own. Before I get much further and forget, Carol, there are some housekeeping matters that we have to deal with. I'll hand over to you.
Good morning. Thank you for attending today's hearing. So, as Paul said, some housekeeping notes. Can you all hear me? Am I close enough? Right. Please ensure that you signed in. The forms are at the front of the building for people who are participating, and upstairs by the gallery for people who are observing. There's no scheduled fire alarms for today, so if the fire alarm does go off, it's a genuine alarm. So if it goes off, if you make your way outside via the main doors and then congregate, the fire point is if you go left and it's down at the traffic light, so the corner of Gilligate, Claremont Terrace and Lord Mayor's Walk, and wait further instructions from the Citadel Fire Warden. The toilets are located in the corridors. If you go out these doors, it's just down there, side of this main room. During lunch break, there's a number of cafes on Gilligate for lunches and drinks. There's also a Tesco's Express, and so I'm not discriminating. There's also a Sainsbury's just a little bit further down the corner. You'll notice that there's cameras, so we are filming today's proceedings, which will be then uploaded to the Council's YouTube page. If you have any issues with being filmed, if you'd like to just have a word with me, I can then put you in a position where you won't be caught on camera. So if you just let me know. The Wi-Fi password is General Booth 1883. There's signage on the walls telling you what how it's set out. If you have any general inquiries about today's session, I've got the programme office is up there on the gallery, just in the corner. So if you have any problems, just come up and see me on there, or my contact details are on the sign there with the email and telephone number. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Just a few matters that I need to touch on before we get on with things. I don't want to detain everyone too long with these matters, but this is a phase 5 hearings, and yeah, I gulped slightly before saying that. I'll not go into the details of why we're here. I think we all understand the position, but I'm here today to deal with a single matter, and that is the way the plan, as proposed and as proposed to be modified, deals with provision for gypsies and travellers, and also to perhaps, in a slightly different way, travelling show people. I don't want to go much beyond that. Obviously, I circulated some MIQs some time ago now, which you've all, or some of you have responded to with statements which I found very helpful. Of course, I've read those, but I do propose to go through this, through the MIQs in order, but you know, I accept that there is some overlap between them, obviously, and I'm quite content that, you know, if we do drift from one into another, or from 1 to 5 or 1 to 4, however it works, I'm relaxed about that. Site visits. We visited the Outgang Lane site at Osbaldwick yesterday on an accompanied basis. We had a good walk around the existing provision. We looked at the site where expansion is proposed, and we looked at some of the adjoining uses. I hope people's boots have recovered. Yeah, I think mine are might be a write-off, but there we are. Yeah, it was informative though, and I also need to add that I visited on an unaccompanied basis. I didn't go into them, but I observed them and saw what goes on at the sites in Water Lane in Clifton. And I also visited the site at James Street in Layerthorpe. I did that yesterday on an unaccompanied basis. So I'm not as familiar with those, but I have an understanding of their general context. There's nothing more really I need to say by means of introduction, but I think it would be worth going around the table just to introduce ourselves in the way that's become traditional at these hearings, as far as I remember. I'm going to start on this way and go clockwise.
Thank you very much, sir. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Willers, and that's spelled W-I-L-L-E-R-S, rather than A-R-S, as advertised. I'm a King's Counsel, and I'm instructed by York Travellers Trust.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Abby North. I'm a trustee, York Travellers Trust.
Hi, I'm Violet Cannon. I'm CEO of York Travellers Trust and chairperson of Moving for Change.
Michael Hargreaves. I'm a planning consultant. I've worked.
Steady. Yeah.
Michael Hargreaves. I'm a planning consultant. I've worked for a number of years for York Traveller Trust.
Morning, sir.
Morning. Hi.
We meet again. Mark Waters, Ward Councillor, Osborwick and Derwent, which includes the Outgang Lane site.
Good morning, sir. Mark Newby, landowner and a town planner of the adjacent land to the Osborwick Outgang Lane site.
Okay.
Morning, sir. Morning, everyone. Paul Butler, planning consultant here on behalf of TW Fields. I've been here for sites ST7, ST14 previously.
Morning, sir. This has gone on so long that I started as Barton Wilmore, then Barton Wilmore, now Stantec, but I'm now Stuart Knackers of just Stantec. Okay. So I'm here on behalf of Barrett and David Wilson Homes and Vistry.
Mr. Waring, hi.
Morning, sir.
Morning.
Tim Waring from Quad, acting on behalf of LDP, ST15. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate I'm not participating really in this, just observing, but may get called into questions if it relates to ST15. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen, you're all right.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Jones. I'm the Head of Housing Delivery and Asset Management at the City of York Council.
Good morning, Laura Bartle, Strategic Planning Policy Manager for the City of York Council.
Good morning, I'm Alison Cook. I'm the Head of Strategic Planning Policy for City of York Council.
Thank you.
And last and definitely least, David Helvin KC and Matthew Henderson to my left, counsel for the council.
Thank you.
And so when at a convenient moment, I wouldn't mind some introductory remarks just to assist. In particular, there's some new matters I want to draw to your attention. Thank you.
Good, that's helpful. I did want to clarify, and thank you, Mr. Waring, for raising it. There are people around the table, obviously. There are those who have a right to be heard because on the specific matter of policy H5, policy H6, having made representations on those policies. There are others that I've said it would be helpful to have around the table just in case the conversation goes into areas where you might have an interest. I mean, obviously I'm acutely aware of the dangers, might be too strong a word, but you'll understand what I mean, about going too far into how H5 works in terms of strategic sites. But it may be that the conversation goes there, so I think it's right that you're at least here and able to understand what might arise from that. So in terms of participation, we're limited to that around the table. I'm quite happy people obviously to observe and watch, but I'll need to be, quite strong about how we deal with that. And I've been very specific in my questions. There was one other thing, or just a couple of other things I need to touch on. If you do want to speak, it's the usual thing of nameplates on end, and I'll do my best to see you. The back of the room is a little hazy for my eyesight, but there we are. The other point I wanted to touch on, which is linked to what Carol said about proceedings being recorded and uploaded to YouTube, is just in terms of the way we deal with personal information. So if we can be discreet about that, it's if we're talking about families or named persons, can we just be careful about that? And if there is an issue, there is a gap between the recording being uploaded, we might have to deal with that. But if I can just counsel caution on that, please, unless it's absolutely necessary. Good. There's nothing else I really need to say before we get on with things. But yes, Mr. Elvin, if there are some introductory remarks you want to make, I'll be interested to hear.
Firstly, can I have circulated a revised Appendix 2? Because we realised at a late stage, i.e. yesterday morning, or the day before, that in fact the table that appears at Table 3, which are the latest figures representing need, although the totals were the same, it wasn't the same as the table appearing in the main body of the representations. So can I just circulate Appendix 2, and all it does is it makes sure that Figure 1 and Table 5.3 are identical. What it in fact did is there was a percentage for non-definitional need, and that was then added in, so the total numbers don't change, but it's just the way they were handled. And this just means that it matches Figure 1 at 1.1.7 of our hearing statement. So, as you've said, this is a series of issues which you've asked for assistance on, particularly concerning the suitability of Osbaldwick site for expansion, and you've now seen the site. There appear to be no wider concerns about the assessment of need or the site selection process, and of course you have ample details about the many years and changes in that process. And for example, I recall referring to this many times during earlier phases, but you've got in the SA for the Reg 19 version of the plan, you've got Appendix K, which is an audit trail which takes you through the various changes which have occurred since the aborted 2014 plan, and that's core document 13B, pages K77 to 82. So that's the background as to how the site selection process changed from 2014. There's a point raised by the Travellers Trust about that, but the audit trail will explain what happened. We have obviously taken account of the amendments to the PPTS following the Lisa Smith case, which were published at the same time as the MPPF in December. And we've also taken the opportunity of reassessing the need figures. We reached the conclusion, and you've got a detailed appendix from Mr. Jarman, Appendix 1, which says this doesn't require any significant modifications, but we did the reassessment process just to ensure that we'd taken on board the revised definition, which effectively resets the definition to what it was before 2015. I also, it's important to point out that there is a change of approach in the Council since we last met and since these issues were last discussed. And I need to make it clear that the Council, as you'll have seen from our hearing statement and from the report to Executive, intends to take further steps to ensure delivery of additional pitches and to pursue the improvement to what we acknowledge are problems with site conditions, and which you'll have heard about yesterday and no doubt we'll hear more today. It is clear to us, having looked at the matter, that there has been a failure of communication and that issues, particularly with regard to dust and other matters, have not been getting to the people they need to get to, and there has been perhaps insufficient action by Housing, Environmental Protection and the Environment Agency, and it needs a greater degree of joined-up thinking so that there is proper reaction to dealing with the problems that are experienced on site. And you'll see that that's referred to in the report. following that executive report, another report is proposed which will deal with the steps that are going to be needed in order to improve site conditions. There seems to have been something of a rather mechanistic attitude taken to requiring specific complaints, and we accept that that is not an appropriate way to deal with the matter, and that there needs to be clear lines of communication from the site officer through the housing department to other parts of the council to ensure that conditions are improved, because it's accepted that there have been, in particular, and I think you heard about this yesterday, dust problems from the adjacent waste site. That site needs to be investigated further to see whether not only steps need to be taken in terms of environmental protection, but also in terms of planning enforcement, because there's a condition which limits the height of the waste heaps, and we're far from satisfied that they're being complied with. That degree of action you will see reflected in the Council's executive approach. Secondly, it is now recognised that in order to secure delivery and soundness of the policies, the Council will have to forward fund what it expects to have to pay in capital terms in order to guarantee the securing of future pitches. As you know, previously reliance was based on Section 106 contributions, but it's acknowledged that they're not going to come forward sufficiently quickly in order to secure delivery. And so you'll also see that there's an indicative capital figure which is being put before Executive for approval in coming weeks of over £5 million. It's not a precise figure. It's a headline figure based on current rough estimates, but it's accepted by the Council that we have to forward fund and recover the sums that will be due over time via Section 106. Maybe not all are recoverable, but the Council accepts it needs to take responsibility for delivery on its own site. You will also have seen a scope on the site for delivery, and it seemed to us that if you were concerned there was insufficient land, there is a relatively simple solution to deal with this. I know the Travellers' Trust suggest green belt exceptions, which of course, as you know, is not consistent with national policy. It seems to us that the solution to this is in fact not to accept our proposed modification to enlarge the green belt, but to leave a portion of the Oswaldwick site out of the green belt designation. And you had this put forward to you in two documents. The December 2022 proposed modifications post phase 3, which is EXCYC 121A, paragraph 4.6 on page 6, which explains, this is the paper for provision of gypsies and travelling show people, December 22, which suggested drawing in, tightening the greenbelt boundaries around the Oswaldwick site. The comparative plans as to the Reg 19 local plan greenbelt boundaries and the proposed modification are at PMM 26 of EXCYC 128A, page 37. And it seems to us that if there is concern about sufficiency of land available, rather than go through the tortuous approach in the future of either seeking to take it out of the green belt in due course or looking to rely on special circumstances, which, as you know, government is not keen on from the PPTS, it seems to us the simple approach is to reject the modification, and therefore it never goes into the green belt and it remains available for expansion without the restrictions of green belt policy. So it achieves effectively what the YTT argues without having to go around in circles and breach national policy by trying to allocate a green belt site. So our invitation to you is, if you think it is therefore required, the simple approach, because it's already been consulted upon, is simply to revert to the 2018 publication draft of the local plan and to reject the modification. And then it doesn't go into the green belt and those problems do not arise. So I hope that provides what might be regarded as the simplest solution to the need for additional land if you form the view, Mr. Barclay formed the view that that is necessary. So far as the site selection exercises, you've had all the material on that. No other sites are advanced. The executive report will endorse future site searches continuing, but as you know, over the last 10 years of various processes in the local plan arena, nothing else has come forward. And no further sites are suggested today. So our view, and indeed the evidence view, is this is it in terms of what is available, and we are taking greater steps than had been considered necessary in the past to secure delivery, and also to proceed to improve the living conditions of those on the site and those who will be living on the site in the future. The only thing I want to say finally is we do not accept the proposed amendments by some of the strategic site operators to Policy 5. Rather than introducing mere flexibility, it will actually remove the duty of the strategic site developers to provide sites, because it will remove the duty in policy terms to seek an alternative site if an on-site provision isn't sought. But we think there is sufficient flexibility in the policy as is. There's nothing to stop the site developers from negotiating with others, including the council, to find off-site alternatives, but it should be their responsibility since they are bringing forward the strategic sites. So we would urge no change to Policy H5, contrary to the views of the owners of some of the strategic sites who put forward the same point. So I hope that explains our position sufficiently, and we can go into that in more detail as you think appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elvin. Mr. Willers,
so
is there anything in that you want to respond to immediately?
What I'd like to do, if it's acceptable, sir, is to set out our stall very briefly. There are some elements of what Mr. Elvin said that I probably would need to take instructions on, but others perhaps have listened to what he's had to say and may have some comments to make about it. There is a document that I'd like to put before you, sir, if you are agreeable to accepting it. That is a perfected version of the hearing statement. It's really at my insistence as opposed to anybody else who sits to my left, because I'm a pedant. And I noticed some errors in the footnotes. There were rogue footnotes and question marks, and it wasn't the version that I'd intended be sent in, having spent time editing it to ensure that
Are there any significant changes?
No, not at all. But there's a few question marks which have been taken out, and it's all in the foot. It really is as pedantic as it comes. I certainly would. That's fine. Thank you. We're not going to go over old ground here today because you've set out the matters that you're concerned with. But I'm going to just draw attention to the fact that we're still in a position where there is no logical explanation for the marked difference in the number of pitches that were identified as needed back in 2014 compared with the figures set out in the 2024 GTAA review carried out by Mr. Jarman. The definition is now exactly the same as it was back in 2014 when 66 pitches were identified as being needed. And there is no explanation for the reduction in pitches today. And going further than that, what we have from Mr. Jarman is an assumption that really the definition change resulting from the Lisa Smith case makes no difference, because the gypsies and travellers that he has counted, in effect, were not travelling in any event, and the need arising from them would not be a PPTS need. Well, that is a gross assumption to make on the basis of proxy interviews without there having been any assessment of whether or not those who will form households in the next 5 years will go on to travel. how can one possibly say that none of those 11 households that are going to be formed from families that he considers do not fall within the PPTS definition as currently drafted in the 2023 PPTS document will not travel if they've not carried out any interviews to see what the intentions of those individuals are? It's a gross assumption, and it's a fundamental flaw in Mr. Jarman's approach, and results in a position where we do not have a robust evidence base in compliance with PPTS paragraph 7C, and we do not have a plan being put forward to you, sir, which identifies a supply of specific deliverable sites to provide 5 years' worth of sites to meet locally set needs. Paragraph 10A of PPTS is not complied with. It is not consistent with that policy provision. And therefore, I'm afraid, as currently drafted, we have local plan policy which is not sound. Now, the policy 5A identifies 4 pitches on Oswaldwick and 6 pitches on Clifton as being capable of being provided. The question is, why have those 2 sites been identified? Why have we not been presented with other sites which might accommodate those pitches? Why have the council resorted to the default position of expanding council sites? Well, it's because that land is in the council's ownership. That's the simple position. It's not after a proper search for sites had been carried out by this council, because, as you know, this council considered wrongly, as indeed you and your colleague pointed out, that because most of the council area was in the Greenbelt, they would need to show exceptional circumstances in order to, in effect, identify land which could be taken out of the Greenbelt for use as a traveller site. You pointed that fact out to the council, but there's been no subsequent search carried out, having taken account of what you and your colleague have said. We don't yet have a Greenbelt boundary which has been defined, and therefore there is no need for exceptional circumstances. But this council, rather than going to the trouble of undertaking a search, having had that point made to them, have instead resorted, as I've said, to the default position of expansion of 2 sites. Now, we don't quibble, and we don't want to waste any time arguing about the Clifton site. You visited it. Apparently it has sufficient provision for 6 additional pitches, perhaps with some reconfiguration. Perhaps that will be to the benefit of everybody. But as far as Oswaldwick is concerned, the first thing you might have thought before the council opted to suggest that Oswaldwick be expanded, even by a measure of 4 pitches, would be that the residents of Oswaldwick would have been consulted. There's been no consultation with the residents in Oswaldwick, whether it be for the 4 pitches, which is suggested will be supplied on that site within the next 5 years, or indeed in respect of what is anticipated by virtue of policy H5B, a possibility of another 13 pitches being supplied on that site. No consultation at all with the site residents. And that, I'm afraid, sir, is something which troubles York Travellers Trust, and we would suggest should trouble you and your colleague too, because what we need to ensure, as indeed policy 5A identifies, is that the accommodation currently provided by Oswaldwick is secure and safe for those residents living on that site at this point in time. That site, 18 pitches as it currently is, a large site in terms of its numbers, according to the council, will be initially expanded to the size of 22 pitches, but possibly to a 35-pitch site. You visited the site yesterday, sir, and I perhaps don't need to repeat everything that you might have seen, but whether or not it's in the Greenbelt, it is located at the end of a lane that runs through an industrial estate. It has no footpath from one part of the industrial estate running down to and around the, I think it's the recycling unit, up to the site entrance itself. It is dangerous, I would suggest, for residents living on that site to walk and indeed to cycle along that lane back to the main road when there are HGV vehicles operating from all manner of sites along that lane without provision of a footway, without even, I think, street lighting. You know, it's just the sort of situation where no doubt you, sir, in your experience in planning inquiries, have questioned the appropriateness, the sustainability, the safety of residents who would wish to live in such circumstances, or it's being suggested should do so. And it's not just unsafe for children and mothers with prams and those who are disabled. It's unsafe for any road user, I'd respectfully suggest, given the level of traffic and heavy goods vehicle traffic running along that road. And yet this is the site that the council are suggesting should be expanded, perhaps by a factor of 17 additional pitches, at a time when, as we know, and has been accepted rightly today by my learned friend, there is a poor record of management of that site. And in circumstances where, as I said, it's not the site residents who've suggested they should have more pitches. It's not as if those on Osborne have said, we've got family members, we're doubling up, we really need more pitches. There's a piece of land right adjacent to us. Please extend this site in order to accommodate our growing families. Far from it. I think I'm right in saying that you or your colleague was told by one of the site residents, you know, from the horse's mouth, if I can put it that way, yesterday, they do not want this site expanded. We know that some of the council officers don't want this site expanded. You'll remember the FOI material, but I'm not going to go there again. And so, in circumstances where the residents haven't been consulted, and they certainly haven't voted, as it were, for an expansion, you might think that the proposed expansion of Osborne is high-handed, to say the least. I won't suggest what else it might be considered to be, but it's inappropriate and really just a default position taken by the council because of the failure to perhaps appreciate that it could have looked into the green belt as currently undefined for an alternative site. And then having had that point made to them, pointed out by you and your colleague, decided not to undertake that site search. And when it comes to policy H5B, we know that the developers, some of whom are represented today, have suggested that policy H5B won't work. They may have their own motivations for saying so, but actually what we agree with them on is this, that ultimately, if there is going to be any, as it were, positive progress made as a consequence of policy H5B, it's going to be in the form of commuted payments. And those payments, it seems quite clear, are going to be spent expanding the Osborne site. That's where we're going to end up. And I think it's very unlikely, and you cannot be satisfied, that we're going to end up with 2 or 3 pitches here and there on the edge of strategic sites. That money is going to be, instead we're going to have commuted payments, and we're going to end up with an overlarge site at Osborne that nobody wants, and a site where residents will be put in a position where they will have to live adjacent to that industrial site with all the harms that arise from it, including to those who are vulnerable. And we know that the health of gypsies and travellers, we know this from one of the appendices put in by the council itself, is very poor compared with the general population. So this won't do, we would suggest. And at the moment, as presently drafted, the plan is not sound. Now, York Travellers Trust do not want to stand in the way of development in this city. Far from it. We're very happy to see, and indeed would want to see, the development which is suggested on the strategic sites. And so we have suggested a way forward which would enable you, sir, to, as it were, give the green light to that strategic development by issuing, as indeed in other local plan examinations, a partial report at this stage, which gives the policies, other than the gypsy and traveller policy, as it were, the full weight that they deserve, and enables that development to go ahead, but requires the council to go back to the drawing board, but in an urgent way, search for sites, noting that at this stage the greenbelt is not, as it were, set in stone, and find alternatives, and alternatives which give gypsies and travellers, you know, a habitable place on which they can locate their sites and live in their caravans in accordance with their traditional way of life. We would respectfully suggest that that is the appropriate way forward in this instance, and indeed, unless and until the council carry out that search and then identify land, carry out that search and then identify land which can accommodate the need arising from the families in the next 5 years, there will be no compliance with policy PPTS, paragraph 10A. We have suggested that there could be an exceptions policy. Indeed, the council itself came up with an exceptions policy. I think it was GB4, but then withdrew it. We note that I think it's Mr. Natkus from Stantec has a similar view to ours, which is that a policy could be adopted, unusually, I accept, but one which effectively sets out that in circumstances where there is a continuing unmet need for additional pitches in the City of York, where there are insufficient sites identified in the local plan, in other words, non-compliance with paragraph 10 of PPTS, and there is a personal need for a site, well then very special circumstances will exist. In other words, the harm by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm will be clearly outweighed by the material considerations. Now that, Mr. Elvin says, is contrary to policy. Well, in 2013, this very same council, in granting itself planning permission to expand the Osbaldwick site by a factor of 6 pitches, came to the conclusion that very special circumstances did exist to grant that permission because of the unmet need and because of the lack of sites identified that could meet that need. So we've got a precedent in this very council relating to the, somewhat ironically, the Osbaldwick site. We would suggest that an exceptions policy like that, should the council decide to propose it and put it forward, would ensure that up until the point when sufficient sites have been identified, at least in terms of the greenbelt barrier, the hurdle, which will be encountered by all gypsies and travellers seeking to provide for themselves in this council area, they will be able to overcome that. They would still have to comply with policy HC and the criteria-based policy that you see in that draft policy. So it wouldn't be a given that they would be entitled to planning permission. There would be any number of other criteria they would have to comply with in order to do so. But it would at least relieve the pressure and ensure that gypsies and travellers would have a chance, at least, of obtaining planning permission in this council area in the meantime, whilst the council carries out further work and perhaps identifies sites you going through a proper site selection process. So those are my submissions at the moment. I think the documents were handed out, so yeah.
Yes, I have the revised.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry, I have the revised hearing statement with the corrected footnotes, which I discussed with Carol before we opened this morning about how we'll deal with that on the examination website, and it can go up in due course.
Very relaxed, having handed it to you, that it goes wherever you want it, at the very end, if necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Properly, I think, Mr. Elvin, I ought to come back to you to ask if there are any observations you want to make about what we've just heard.
Yes, Mr. Willis' submissions are a recipe for prevarication, I'm afraid. We have presented to you evidence of the site search. There are no alternative sites that have been identified in the various call for sites and the various assessments. And all that Mr. Willis' submissions lead to is the non-adoption of the local plan, which will mean no policies to support gypsies, travellers and showfolk in the near future. It is simply unacceptable for Mr. Willis to suggest that this matter, well, where we can have a patching approach having regard to the green belt and special circumstances. As you know, paragraph 16 of the PPTS says that personal circumstances and unmet need are unlikely to outweigh harm to the green belt. And this is a local plan process, not a shall we patch it into, sorry. Yep, page 5. This is a local plan process, not shall we patch it by development management. The only way that the plan is likely to provide robust provision on figures which have been explained on several occasions and which are justified. They take account of growth over the 5 years of the plan and beyond. They take account of family expansion and that there may be others who wish to travel. We also aim to make provision for non-definitional need for which there is no duty to provide sites. The fact is the YTT through Mr. Willis presents no alternatives other than prevarication. It's not open to him to say, well, the green belt's not fixed yet. The general, as you know better than anybody, the general scope of the green belt is already determined, and all we're doing is fixing the detailed boundaries. It must be in the public interest that this plan proceeds to adoption as soon as possible, assuming you find that it is sound. We don't suggest that this is scope for more prevarication. We have offered what we consider to be, we hope, a practical way of securing delivery for the numbers we've identified and which we've supported on many occasions through various papers which you've had. What Mr. Willis says appears simply not to acknowledge or understand what's said in the executive report. And I'll just draw your attention to the executive report, which specifically addresses the site issues of access, dust, and the like. Paragraphs 28 to 32 of the executive report. And we have advanced this morning what we suggest is a pragmatic solution should additional land be necessary for the reasons we've suggested. As for the alleged lack of consultation, for Mr. Willis to say this at phase 5 of local plan examination, when there have been numerous hearings, numerous opportunities to make representations, and the YTT has been operating in the interests of the site occupiers, I'm afraid it doesn't bear much scrutiny. You've had ample representations and views put forward, and we suggest the position has now been reached where a line has to be drawn, and we say you have got evidence to suggest that the plan is sound, and it's not to be delayed. It should not be delayed further or patched in the meanwhile by development management applications which are not supported by national policy. Whatever happened in 2013, 11 years later, in the light of current policy and current circumstances, is not a reason for not proceeding with the plan as we suggest it should be modified today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elvin. Well, I'll come to Councillor Waters first, if I may.
Thank you, sir. It was a very brief point, just in relation to what Travellers Trust KC had said, and I didn't want it to get swept along. Obviously, today he'll be dealing more with the Osborwick site, but he did mention briefly at the start about Clifton, and I didn't want there to be any impression that expansion of Clifton was considered acceptable, certainly not from my point of view. And of course, that was the position of City of York Council 10 years ago. I'm glad Mr. Elvin's relying on executive reports, because this is an executive report from 2013 which stated, in addition to this, the number of pitches on the Clifton and James Street sites are already at a level where, when considering best practice, you would not increase the number of pitches on these sites. That's all I wanted to say, sir. I just didn't want Clifton sort of forgotten about this afternoon.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Mr. Elvin, do you want to respond to that particular point? Or
I've already said matters have changed a lot since 2013. We are where we are today, and I've already referred you to the audit report, which just guides you through why and how things changed from 2013 onwards. Also draw your attention to SD60, which is the site search for Gypsy and Traveller sites, which specifically considered the possibility of sites in the Green Belt. And then, and then SD18, which I think I've already mentioned, reconsidered the matters. If there were alternative sites, we'd identify them.
thank you. I sort of understand the way this discussion is moving. I'm not entirely sure there's much to be, or there's much mileage in going through my MIQs in a particular order. So I'm going to perhaps, well, let's do things in an order, but perhaps not the MIQ order. The amendments or the modifications that the council is putting forward to us, can we just deal with those briefly so that I don't overlook it later? Let's deal with that as a start point. And
do you want to do it by reference to Appendix 2 as just amended?
I just want everyone to be clear about the position the council is in at the moment and why it's doing what it's proposing.
Yeah. The Appendix 2 gives you two colours. The yellow text are existing proposed modifications, so they're not new. Green is the new. And you've got, firstly, the explanation has been changed, which reflects the PPTS changes and refers to the revised table 5.3, and then you get the revised requirements, which include those who may or may not fall within the categories, what we've called undetermined, but we've increased the numbers to take account of them. And so you get revised figures with a total of 38. And then you've got some additional text at 540A, which sets out in text form the commitment which I mentioned earlier with regard to improvement in living conditions and the like, which is reflected in the executive report. So that's the purpose. There's no change in the structure of the policy beyond the previous modifications. The main changes are to the explanation to reflect the PPTS, the revised numbers, and the council's commitment to improving living conditions. So that's there in a public document as well as the executive report.
Good. Can I ask very briefly if you can explain how we get to 38? Just I mean, I think...
Laura Bartle will deal with that.
Yes, I think I understand it, but I just want to be clear for everyone else in the room.
Okay, so the table at table 1 of our hearing statement gives us the figures that we rely on in the modifications in the policy text. So what that table does is present the update to the need requirements that we've established through the latest piece of work. And in that table, the need is broken down to those that meet the definition, those that don't, and an undetermined representation as well. And that gives us a requirement of 11 through the plan period for those meeting the need, a requirement of 23 for those that don't meet the definition, and 4 undetermined need requirements. So that gives us the overall requirement of 38. And what we've also done there, rather than effectively take those figures and apply them directly to the table, particularly table 5.3 of the revised policy, is we've embedded the undetermined need within the 2 categories of those that meet the definition and those that don't. And in doing that, we've applied the requirements of the national established percentage requirements of how to split the undetermined need and apportion it to those that meet the definition and those that don't. And if you turn to the ORS material at Appendix 1, you'll see that the table on page 4 of that document provides that summary position and sets out the percentages to which we've embedded that undetermined need across those 2 categories. So that takes us to an overall requirement of 12 pitches for those that meet the definition and an overall requirement of 26 for those that don't meet the definition. And it's those figures that you'll find, sir, in the revised table 5.3 of the explanatory text to policy H5.
I understand. Thank you. That's helpful. Mr. Willis, was there anything you want to say about this first? Let's just deal with this before we get on to some other questions.
Certainly, sir. Just looking at that page 4, do you have that page 4 of the ORS enclosure or appendix number 1? Looking through it, it may be that I've got it wrong, but it comes following the subheading Undetermined Gypsies and Travellers. And remembering that it wasn't possible to complete interviews with the Gypsies and Travellers, these were proxy interviews. We have a meet the planning definition. This is for 22 to 27, so 5 years. We've moved on a bit, but there we are. 9 and then 11 who don't meet the definition, and 2 undetermined. And my point, which I made in opening, was that one cannot possibly, by way of proxy interviews, hearsay in effect, with site managers or whoever it was that was giving the information, conclude that the figure of 11, those who do not meet the definition, according to Mr. Jarman, that the generation of households from those people will not include people who will travel for an economic purpose and therefore fall within the definition. And to treat those in a different way, those people who haven't been interviewed, but then to treat them in a different way from those who are considered to be within the definition, would be to treat them differently without any objective justification. And so it brings us back, dare I say it, to the same problems that were identified by the Court of Appeal in the Lisa Smith case, and discrimination. And you remember that in the Lisa Smith case, I say you remember, but if you've seen the judgment, the Court of Appeal were informed about an Equality and Human Rights Commission report, which made it clear that there had been a 75% drop in the assessed need of gypsies and travellers following the PPDS 2015 definition. Just dropped, like a stone. And so we I don't want to repeat it over and over again, but we're back in the 2014 GTAA position where there is a complete mismatch between what was identified by the same company, ORS, in 2014, and that which has been now identified and reviewed by Mr. Jarman of ORS in 2024. And I should just add, there have been no provision of additional pitches in York to explain away the reduction in need. And as far as I'm aware, no mass exodus of gypsies and travellers from York. It's not as if a site got up and left to explain that difference. We're dealing with the same people, the same families, and the same needs.
So can I come back on that?
Yes, for sure.
I don't think Mr. Willers is reading the ORS appendix correctly. The undetermined category, those that could not, the households that weren't interviewed, so a percentage addition was made, pro rata with the numbers who met definitional and non-definitionally. There's no discrimination. We've actually increased the figures to reflect those who couldn't be interviewed, which were a minority of the households concerned. The need figures represent a current assessment of household expansion over the plan period and beyond. That's perfectly clear, because if you look at meets PPTS definition, do not meet PPTS planning definition, and then undetermined. The undetermined, as you see, are in the third table at the top of the fourth page, and that generates an additional need, because it's assumed that there will be additional household requirements generated from those that couldn't be interviewed. There's no discrimination. We've actually increased the figures to reflect the fact that not every household could be interviewed, and that was done through the housing department. The figures as they currently stand are the current figures. Mr. Willers keeps wanting to go back 10 years, but there's a lot of water, as you well know from previous hearings, which follows the 2013-2014 position. And there have been 3 assessments since 2014, and additional changes have been recorded, and you've had a series of update reports since then. The figures have varied over time. You have what are the current figures. And Mr. Willers is, other than pointing to 10 and 11-year-old reports, has not advanced any new information himself. And his clients, if there were new information to be advanced, are in the best position to do so. But they haven't. It's what I said right at the outset. We have carried out what we consider to be an appropriate and a sound exercise, based largely on interviews, making that adjustment to those that we couldn't interview. So his point, in my respectful submission, doesn't actually go where he thinks it goes.
Thank you, Mr. Elvin. Mr. Willers, might I ask, by all means respond, but my solution to that issue that you raise, if I agree with you on that we have an issue with the way that need has been identified, my solution to that is what do you suggest? A new GTAA or something similar?
A GTAA where, contrary to what Mr. Elvin has just said, goes about the process of interviewing the site residents, because this is the first time I've attended one of the hearings in this local plan examination, but I did enjoy watching the YouTube hearing of Phase 3, and I remember Mr. Henderson was representing the council, and Mr. Moore from ORS attended. And not only what I heard, but also what I've been instructed is that, in fact, the interviews that Mr. Elvin talks about didn't take place. These were proxy interviews, and that the information that the council have about the extent to which families comply with the definition arise from the information given by site managers or other officers within the council. We haven't had anybody identified as being the source of this information. Not interviews with individuals. Now, if I'm wrong about that, I'm wrong. It must be a factual point that can be clarified. And, you know, we welcome the council clarifying it if we've got this wrong. But proxy interviews is what I understand to have been the source of the information. And that's not good enough. And particularly if you're assuming, as Mr. Jarman does, that the households arising in the next 5 years, forming in the next 5 years, generated by people that he considers do not fall within the planning definition, will be households which will not travel. Because we're not talking about people who do not have a tradition of travelling. We're talking about ethnic minority groups who have a traditional way of life, living in caravans and travelling for an economic purpose. It's difficult to do so these days. We know that. It's getting increasingly difficult. But that's no reason to think that they will not travel in the future. And to suggest that there is, one can make an assumption without carrying out interviews and understanding the intentions of the family members is a fundamental flaw in Mr. Jarman's thought process. And indeed, that underpins, I'm afraid, the policy that is being put forward before you. So what's the solution? Go away and carry out a proper gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment. I suppose there could be a middle way, which might be to say, well, a percentage of that figure of 11 are likely to travel for an economic purpose. There's this 30% figure, which you'll know is an assumption figure that ORS apply when it comes to the question of undetermined households. If one applies the 30% figure, which we don't accept is necessarily the right figure, but there we are, then one ends up with an additional requirement for about 4 pitches, 30% of 11, I think of. It's a rough and ready calculation. If there were additional 4 pitches identified in the next 5 years to accommodate that assumed need generated by the 11 households that are set out in that table on page 4, well then that would be better than nothing. And that's probably as far as I can take that.
Just to be clear that I'm understanding that properly, would that mean that the figure of 38 would become 42? Is it as straightforward as that?
Not misrepresenting the position, but
Ms. Bartle, I've got that wrong, have I?
If I understand Mr. Miller's point, I think we're talking about the way in which the undetermined need is apportioned. So the overall requirement remains the same.
I mean, Mr. Willers is barking up the wrong tree, because we're dealing with both definitional and non-definitional need, which includes household expansion. And the fact that you're providing for non-definitional need means if someone chooses to travel, then they're being provided anyway.
So all that would change is the makeup of the 38 rather than the 38 figure.
It moves from one category into another of a need which is already accepted. Just respond as well on the question of the interviews. You were given the information in CYC 88. This is the GTAA for June 2022, paragraph 1.3, which says it's a combination of desk-based research, stakeholder interviews, engagement with members of the travelling community living on all known sites, yards and encampments. So yes, there were some proxy interviews, but there were also actual interviews. So you get that explanation at 1.3 of CYC 88, which is in the pre-2023 part of the examination library. Thank you.
So this is the way I would suggest it would affect the position. What one ends up with then is a 5-year supply and a requirement under paragraph 10A of the PPTS to identify a 5-year supply of specific deliverable sites, which would accommodate not just those who the council have concluded meet the planning definition, and I think an element of the undetermined, but also a proportion of those that the 11 families that have been identified as not meeting the planning definition. So, in other words, there has to be sites identified to meet an additional need, if it was a 30% and 4 pitches, of an additional 4 pitches to those which the council have already identified.
So the difficulty
so the figures go up.
So the difficulty is, of course, is you're trying to predict how people are going to behave in the future, and all you can do is make a future assessment, and you'll see from the firstly, there's no 5-year requirement for non-definitional need. That only applies to definitional need. But you'll see how the figures have been made up, and they look at household expansion. Whether or not the children of those currently living on the site will choose to travel is a matter for them, and they will have to make that decision for themselves in the future. We are guessing. All we can do is make provision on the information available to us now.
And so we are guessing because we haven't carried out the interviews.
I suppose it's a question of whether it's a sort of finger in the air guess or a sort of something with an informed estimate, shall we say. Mm. Is there anything else we need to...
Excuse me, sir. Can I just clarify who undertook the latest interviews, which was the temporary accommodation manager for City of York Council, who's been a long-standing member of staff dealing with the Gypsy and Traveller community, and also the housing supervisor who was on site with us yesterday, Mr. Wayne Martin, who also deals directly with the families. So they're directly, have been directly working with the community and understand who are on each of the different pitches.
Is there anything else we need to deal with on this matter? Because I'd like to move on.
Could I just raise a point, please? I feel like I'm misremembering the hearing of 2022 when you categorically said you carried out no interviews and they were all done by proxy. That was categorically stated within the meeting, so I'm very confused. I'm clearly misremembering something. And I would also like to state that we welcome Mr. Elvin's suggestion that YTT are best placed to carry out a GTAA. Definitely, and had we had the funds to do that, we would have done quite fabulously. So thank you for that. We really appreciate that.
Well, I wasn't at the previous hearing when we dealt with this because I was away, and Simon was sitting here and not me. But so I could trawl through the YouTube record of it. But yeah, okay.
We might be able to identify, because it's all timed, the elements. So I've trawled through it as well. So, but we can do that if it helps.
I think probably best leave that with me. Yeah, I'm not sure that I can take this point much further here. I'm clearly going to have to scratch my head and think about that. And clearly, I've asked the question about what happens if I agree with YTT on this, and what position are we in. So I have that. I'm also very clear about what happens if I don't. So yeah, I don't think we can take this matter much further. What I wanted to move on to, I wonder whether we might have a break, actually, before we move on to another subject. But when we come back in 15 minutes, I want to talk about the Osbaldwick site in particular, the existing conditions and the possibilities around expansion. So I'm going to adjourn until 25 past, and when we come back, I want to get onto that subject, if that's okay. Thank you. Until then, thanks everyone.